Our guest speaker today is Jaison Oliver. Jaison spends a great deal of time reading and discussing critical race theory, intersectionality, and Afrofuturism. When he's not busy with his work as an education consultant, professional tutor, and teacher, Jaison volunteers at organizations centered around education, hunger, social justice, and wellness. Jaison actively seeks to destroy the post-racial mindset wherever he may encounter it. We are very pleased to welcome as our guest speaker today, Mr. Jaison Oliver.
All right, let's hope I can get this all working a little bit fast.
Think about to turn on the projector first.
Oh, no.
And plug it in.
Are we on this?
Go, Stephanie, go. Go, Stephanie, go.
There we go, it's coming. How are you all? There we go. Good. All right, so while this is pulling up, and I can do this.
It's not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
scrolling through all. Yeah,
got it. So,
yes.
while this is coming up, I can just start off, hopefully not having only part of it show. Oh, this will work. I'll make this work. So, while Stephanie is working on this for me, so I'm Jaison Oliver. My talk today is really going to focus on microaggressions, privilege, and committing to difference-based conversations. So really, why this is important is, especially in a community like this, all of our identities are very complex and very intersectional. So we have a lot of different things that kind of make up who we are. And especially in a community like this, you might identify as a secular humanist, or you might identify as a Christian, devout Christian, but still really find value in a community of secular humanists. And same on the other spectrum, you might find value in a regular Christian church, Baptist, Catholic, wherever, and really not identify with the religious aspect, but still really find value in that community. So the real thing that I want to discuss today is how do we account for those people that really are a part of our community while maybe not identifying with every aspect of it, and then how do we consider that in all of our daily interactions. So I really want to start with looking at Christmas. So Christmas, I think, is something we all kind of have an idea of what it is. But imagine if you had never heard of Christmas, right? You just show up to work on December 25th, like it's a regular day, and then no one's there, right? You're sitting there, December 25th, you're trying to get your party, nobody's there. Also, so I'm gonna try and go throughout a lot of pictures. I wanna make this fun and get to the questions really quickly, because I think that a topic like this is best really discussed as opposed to me standing up here and really lecturing like I have all the answers, because I don't. And this is really going to be really more of a cursory, like, very bare bones, really explanation or discussion of this, because there really is so much to this idea of identities, and really talking about microaggressions and privilege and who we are as people. So again, imagine you've never heard of Christmas, you have no idea what it is, and you're sitting there in the office, what am I going to do? You've driven your hour-long commute into the office, nobody's there, you're trying to get work done, you really want to get work done, you don't understand why no one's there, all right? How do you account for these people? How do you know if someone's never heard of Christmas? These are the types of things that are just really assumed in our culture. You wouldn't really expect anyone not to know what Christmas is, right? It's just kind of a given. So it's something that we accept. So microaggressions, really, the definition is a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicates, and so that's key. So it might not be intentional, but it still communicates or conveys a hostile, derogatory, or negative slight or insult toward people of non-dominant identities. So I like this kind of real condensed definition of it, which is subtle, stunning, and often automatic and nonverbal exchanges, which are put downs. So this is really talking about how it's perceived. You can't really control whether you'll offend someone, right? But we can really kind of make allowances for how we interact with people and how we can really try to look at people's identity and confront these. And I'm actually really happy that Stephanie talked about what she did, so looking at abilities and people who are differently able before I came up, because that's really something that's really important. And talking about how she had that conversation with the gentleman there about, you know, really how we use the language, what types of language we use, and how it can really show how we think about a particular topic, I think is incredibly important. So there are some useful descriptors in talking about types of microaggressions that we'll get. So the first is a microassault. So that's really what we think of as maybe traditional racism or traditional sexism. It's just, you know, oh, why did we ever let women start voting? Or, you know, black people are inherently stupid, that kind of stuff. We know that's racist, that's sexist, whatever. I'm not gonna talk about that, because I probably don't really need to do really any convincing there. But a micro insult, subtle snubs, frequently unknown to the perpetrator. So this is the person who's saying, so you don't know if you're saying mentally disabled, that a person might take that as an offense. But it conveys a hidden insulting message to the recipient. So here's one example. So being called hearing impaired instead of deaf or hard of hearing. The term hearing impaired seems silly to be upset over, and this is actually someone's account. There's a blog, a microaggressions blog that I have links, and you'll be able to access this presentation afterward and see where all this comes from. But the term hearing impaired seems silly to be upset over, but when used over and over to describe you, you begin to believe that you are indeed broken instead of just different. I fight against the use of this word every day. So it might be a little thing to us, this small diction change, but it's really important to that person because this is something that they fight against daily. And when you're being assaulted by this language, it really can change the way you perceive yourself. And I'll get into that more later.
It seems like hearing impaired was a sort of a PC term that people came up with to avoid insulting people.
Exactly.
That say, oh, you're deaf is like you're deaf and dumb or something. And so they came up with hearing impaired to be nicer.
And that's actually a very good point. We often may have good intentions in the way that we're trying to use this language. And what works for one person, this person doesn't like the term hearing impaired, but there may be another person who does prefer it. So then it's really important to have these conversations and not just accept these things as given. Don't just assume that everyone knows what Christmas is. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Is really my example over the course of the talk. Okay. So here, micro invalidations. These are microaggressions that communicate or communications that exclude, negate, or nullify the psychological thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person. So here's an example we often hear about. We live in a post-racial society, and people, I hear a lot, you know, I don't see color, I don't see race. And so here's an example. This is from a blog, I Too Am Harvard, where this young lady is saying, people say to her, you know, I don't see color. And she's saying, well, does that mean that you don't see me? This is an important part of my identity. Spoiler alert, I'm a black man. So a part of this is really, a part of my talk is really going to focus on race, because that's really something that I can speak to with some credibility. So micro invalidations, this is a big part of it. So talking about those micro insults and micro invalidations are really going to be what this focuses on, as opposed to the overt discrimination. All right, so ability, I'm going to go through a couple examples of microaggressions. So ability, I wish I could bring my dog out to eat with me, said by a teenage girl and her mother to a young lady or to a young man at a Chinese restaurant who is a 23-year-old with a service dog. It seems harmless, right? You say, oh, I wish I could bring my dog out to a restaurant with me too. But it's really something a lot deeper than just this young man, you know, wanting to bring his little pet with him. This is a real part of his identity, right?
Doesn't it matter how you say it?
I wish I could bring my dog out.
Well,
That would make a big difference between just.
not necessarily. If you're hearing this every day, you're not always going to be paying attention to how it's the little inflections and the way that people are saying things, because you're just being bombarded with this day after day. So even though there might be someone who's trying to say mentally disabled or mentally handicapped in a nice way, but if you're hearing it a million times, you don't necessarily want to explain it to someone. You don't want to take the time to really try and figure out what their intentions are. You just feel bad about it. So that's an example of this here, right? You don't sound Chinese to me. A photographer to someone as they get ready for their senior portrait. Now, these are things that happen all the time. I'll give you $5 a pound for every pound you lose. Female, age 7. These are the types of things that people encounter on a daily basis, right? So we can often, many of us really experience them. I would really hazard a guess that we all experience them, but we can also be unwitting committers we can be unwitting microaggressors. So looking at things like when we talk about transgender, but I'm really curious, can people raise their hand if you've ever heard the term cisgender before? So, but raise your hand if you've heard the word transgender before, right? So we're able to create this other. So transgender is a term that we make for people who identify with a different gender than what they were born with. But we never talk about the opposite, which is people that we don't really create a term, or we haven't used a term in our society as a whole about what it means to be a person who does identify as the gender that they were born as. So that's what cisgender means. Does that make sense? Okay. So, but the fact that none of you, or a small number of you, may have heard of the word cisgender versus transgender, I think is really telling, right? Because it does create this idea of an other. Not taking the time to learn to pronounce a difficult name. And I know I could be guilty of that all the time. You meet someone and they tell you their name, and it's different from, you might remember one person's name, but you're really trying to struggle to pronounce another's. We often think we're doing the right thing. So I think that speaks to what the woman was saying about just how you say it and the way you say it. You're really trying to do the right thing. But it doesn't always, it's not always about you. It is, I think, one of the major themes to what I'm talking about here. So reverse racism is a term that people use a lot to talk about a whole host of things. And just that term in itself, has anyone heard the term reverse racism before? Yeah. And which seems on its face like a ridiculous concept, because is racism really just supposed to work one way? Is that really how? So reverse racism on its face is just a weird concept. Looking at things like, why does this matter? How are these things really ingrained into our society? We look at voter disenfranchisement, and talking about voter ID laws, which is a big issue here in Texas. And so we look at where around the United States we're trying to create these voter ID laws, which there really isn't any evidence to show that voter fraud is a real issue, at least not right now. It's not a real issue, but for some reason we need to make all these laws around addressing this. So voter ID laws is an example of something where it sounds like it has good intentions on its face, but then when you look deeper, it definitely affects specific groups of people far more than it will others. And there are a lot of different examples of that. Identity privilege. You can't really talk about microaggressions without talking about privilege. So privilege is any unearned benefit or advantage one receives in society by nature of their identity. So you don't have to do anything to be a recipient of this privilege. Just by virtue of the fact that you grow up in America and you are of a certain age, you're an adult and interact with people, you know what Christmas is. That's just a privilege that's one small example of a privilege. Examples of aspects of identity that can afford privilege. Race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, class or wealth, ability privilege, citizenship status. There are a lot of different types of privilege, and those are just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. Here's an example number one. I can be pretty sure that my roommate, classmates, or colleagues will be comfortable with my sexual orientation. Another example. So here, looking at, I don't know if any of you heard about this with the NFL draft. This was big news, right? Michael Sam draft day kiss. It was a huge deal. He kissed his boyfriend, first openly gay NFL player to be drafted, right? Huge deal. We're never going to see this kind of an article in football player flaunts sexual orientation on live television. This is never going to happen, right? This isn't a serious article, okay? Privilege example number 2. I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having someone suspect that I got my job because of my disability, gender, or race. The question of rigorous hiring standards and all that really only comes up when you start thinking about, okay, we need to increase more diversity. We have no women in this office. We need to really look at that because that will change the way that we serve our constituents. Now we have to talk, well, right, pull out the binder full of women and look for who's the most qualified. But we don't ask the question of qualifications before we really start talking about being more inclusive of everyone in our community. So that's really a question there. So affirmative action is a negative reaction. This is a poster from, I think it's the White Privilege Conference or something, or a t-shirt. Only racists consider race, which again, ridiculous thing. Race is a part, it's not necessarily it's not a biological reality, but it is a visible reality for all of us, and it's something that affects the way that we go about our lives. It definitely affects how I go about mine. Privilege example number 3. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in a location that I can't afford and want to live in will be neutral or pleasant to me. Well, Trayvon Martin. I don't know if you all have heard about the Trayvon Martin case, or the George Zimmerman case, I should say. But in talking about, I go to the store. I went to get a bunch of bananas for a morning smoothie last night at 12:30 in the morning. I have, by nature of having grown up in the Midwest and lived on the East Coast, I have a surplus of hooded sweatshirts and sweatpants and all that I wear all the time as I ride my bike around Houston. So this was really personal to me. And Trayvon Martin is by no means an exception. So seeing how this man was able to kill a young man who ostensibly did nothing wrong, and who was able to not even be questioned about it, just go home and about his life later on in that day is something that's really kind of hurtful to me. So as I'm hearing about this on NPR, and we're talking about this on my Facebook and Twitter, and it's dominating everything in my circles, well, specific circles, because I walk into my office, which is primarily white. I know everyone in here, everyone in my office listens to NPR. We all listen to NPR. We talk about everything that happens on there. Obscure reference from, whatever, from All Things Considered, oh, they're on that. No one's talking about Trayvon Martin in my office, unless I bring it up. But it's something that we're hearing about all the time. So that's really difficult. Why do microaggressions matter? So looking at things like the ice cream truck, raise your hand if you've heard the ice cream truck song. Right, the origins of the ice cream, I had no idea until all of a week ago. But the origins of the ice cream truck song, it actually comes from, I think, 1950 song called Nigger Love a Watermelon, Ha Ha Ha.
Pop goes the
Because
weasel.
Pop Goes the Weasel, which is hundreds of years old.
That's right.
So this is where
They co-opted it.
But that's not the origin.
That's not
so actually no, this song is specifically about ice cream. So it's talking about, so as the song becomes into the tune might be Pop Goes. So the tune is, but in co-opting that tune for ice cream and talking about ice cream specifically within that context is where this comes in, if that makes sense. We can talk about that a little bit after. So, but then looking more at different types of microaggressions. So you're a boy. Boys don't cry. Do you want people to think you're a girl? So this creates a certain idea of what boys and girls are in all of our heads. Said by an adult woman to my 3-year-old after he had fallen off his bike and cut his lip open. Very sad. Sadly, he is already getting messages like this at such a young age. So it starts early, and it's a part of society. I'm sure all of us have heard someone say, "Be a man," or that's not appropriate for a young lady. These are the types of things that we say in our daily society, right? Here's an example of why this matters. This is a picture of the DC universe. I'm a big fan of science fiction. I like comics. I grew up with comics. I don't know if you kind of look in there, maybe hazard a guess on how many of those are black. It's not going to be a high percentage, but it's really interesting to think about how it might change a person, or how it might change a person's perception of something when you're looking at something like this, or you're reading, you're really interested in something, and you're not necessarily able to identify with the people in there as a part of a large part of your identity. So again, my blackness is very important to me. Looking in here, I mean, hey, I want to be Superman, I want to wear my shirt. But imagine how powerful it would be if Superman was black, right? For me, not for all of you, but for me, I would be really excited about it. So just an example. And we also talked about, and so I mentioned earlier, these things are happening at a young age. So looking at children's books by and about people of color published in the United States. So we have this organization received 3,200 children's books. You had 67 by African Americans, 93 about them. Looking at American Indians, 18 by them, 34 about them. So almost the majority of the books being written about these people are not actually by them. So who's writing these stories? Who's telling these stories? And even those are a very small number, right? How to avoid acting as a microaggressor. So it's really about asking those questions. How can we identify those who maybe don't know what Christmas is? How can we be more welcoming of those people who aren't really sure about what those cultural norms are that we take as a given? So why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? This was a big best-selling book that several years ago, I think it came out maybe around 2007. But when does the question of racial composition come up in a college cafeteria? Because most of the time, I mean, just by nature of the composition of most colleges, it's going to be mostly white. No one asks why all the white kids are sitting together in the cafeteria. It really only comes up when you have different groups or different ethnicities who are sitting together. So will we ever ask a similar question of the white students? And how does it impact students of color to have a significant aspect of their identity largely ignored or not represented by a community? How does it feel to be one of very few people who might be transgender in a specific society? Or if that's not something that comes up in your school or in your work or in your, in your life. Or to be the only person of their race or ethnicity visibly represented in their campus community. So one way that I would say recommend in avoiding acting as a microaggressor is don't qualify So something like, and it's easy to think of it as backhanded compliments, right? I don't usually go for redheads, but you're attractive, so you pass, right? You're great for technology for an elderly person. These kinds of things, on its face, it seems like a great thing. Oh, that's a compliment. Hey, I'm good with technology. All this work that I put in is great. But it really can be hurtful for someone, especially if you're hearing it all the time and you internalize, oh, maybe you're saying, redheads are inherently unattractive. That's something you might be internalizing because it's something that you're told all the time. But it's something that you really have to actively fight against, and we as a community have to actively work against, right? So here's an example of some of those qualifications. So you're really articulate for a black girl. It's not necessarily an unusual mindset. So here's kind of where I take this point of privilege, being the person asked to come and speak, and talk about a few things that are important to me. So you're really articulate for a black girl. Here we have, I don't know if anyone is familiar with this particular actress, Lupita Nyong'o. So she actually went to my alma mater, so I'm very proud of her. But, so yeah, this is from a talk that she gave about beauty, because she was named People's 50 most beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. Like, no one can deny that. It's undeniable. But there was a time, so she says, I remember a time when I too felt unbeautiful. I put on the TV and only saw pale skin. I got teased and taunted about my nightshaded skin. And my one prayer to God, the miracle worker, was that I would wake up lighter skinned. This is, she was just named one of the 50 most beautiful people, and you know, this is something that she had to deal with. Looking at Michael Jackson. Look at him as a young man, and then look at him as an adult. These are things that people are actively fighting against in their lives, right? Holiday, this is the movie, The Best Man Holiday, nearly beats Thor as race-themed films soar. If they had any person of color really on their staff who really kind of identified, they wouldn't have put this up because they would realize it's ridiculous. Race-themed film, I don't know if any of you saw the movie The Best Man Holiday. It's just a movie about a group of friends. It's the same type of movie that every other kind of romance ensemble movie is. But somehow it's a race-themed film because it happens to feature a predominantly black cast. So race-themed films soar. Here's actually, but people are able to really make some, you know, bring some levity into the situation. We get a lot of movies about this. You get a movie that's just about a bunch of friends getting together, dating and all that, it's a race-themed film. We get a movie about slavery or antebellum life or anything like that, and it becomes a contender for, you know, an Academy Award. So there are a lot of jokes that pop up on the internet about these types of issues. You're welcome, black people. White people solve racism. So it's, you know, you're seeing Fruitvale Station, and people are saying, I'm really getting tired of seeing black people in difficult situations. You know, we're happy sometimes too. It doesn't always have to be The Butler and The Help and Fruitvale Station and, you know, every other movie that's come out in the past 10 years that really focuses on that got any kind of critical acclaim, that focuses on black people in some kind of subservient or magical Negro or some kind of stereotypical role, right? So I'll put a little quote from James Baldwin here. To be black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. It really, and I think that really applies to a lot of different groups. And when you're looking at I think it goes back to that conversation about abilities, right? You're hearing these things from all directions. And you may not bring it up to folks, but it's something that you're internalizing and you're dealing with it on your own. And having a community or having some support to really work on that is incredibly valuable. How to be an ally. So how to be an ally and how to really work against these microaggressions, these systems of privilege and oppression. Don't proceed into guilt and defensiveness. Don't just say, I don't do that. It's not about you. It's about the society that we live in. You didn't make your job celebrate Christmas, or probably, I don't know, sometimes people are able to do that. But you didn't make your job celebrate Christmas. And most of you probably would not make your job celebrate Christmas if you had that option. You might just want another vacation day, right? You'd rather just take whatever day you felt like. So don't just recede into guilt and defensiveness, because it's really not about you. Know that it's not your responsibility to speak for others. You don't have to go and be a voice for those, you know, for the unheard. Work to uplift the marginalized voices of those who are affected by the many manifestations of privilege. So a lot of people who are knowledgeable about these things and have really taken a lot of time and who have deeply personal experience with these issues, take the time to seek them out and really learn about what's going on. Educate yourself. Seek authentic accounts to educate yourself about an issue. While I'm happy to come up and talk about this to you all, every person, you know, every black person may not be as willing to talk to you about issues around race or issues around gender, sexuality, or whatever may come up. It might be deeply personal and something they don't want to talk to you about, and that's okay too. Or an opinion that I have, you know, maybe we talked about differently abled or mentally disabled or brain disorder. Again, those preferences can be individual. So it's really hard. It's actually really challenging. And it kind of sucks to be aware of these things because you can't really forget it, because now you know, maybe maybe I'm not being the ally or supportive to that person as I thought I was. But be forthright about offering your support and assistance, because it is a challenge that people are dealing with as a part of their daily lives. So you taking the initiative to really step forward and offer your support can be really, really helpful. Next, think of ways in which you can undermine patterns and systems of oppression in your life. So maybe you do have a little influence to stop Christmas from being the holiday and getting it switched to just a day, an extra vacation day, because that's what you want. Maybe you want people to come in and work on Christmas. Take on different, maybe. But if we just take that as a given, that everyone wants Christmas off, that's probably not going to work for everyone always, right? Take on difficult conversations. So that's why I talk about difference-based conversations. Take on difficult conversations focusing on actions rather than character. So there's a book called Racism Without Races. And so we have racism in our society. You individually may not be racist, but you may live within a racist or an oppressive system. You may not be individually oppressing someone, but the system that we live in may be perpetuating that oppression. And also be flexible. These things are changing all the time. How I feel today might not be how I feel tomorrow about race, or how I feel about sexuality, or how I feel about Christmas. These things might change. Maybe I want Christmas next year. I reserve that right. So we'll talk about a few. This is an example of kind of how not to really be an ally. So there was a hashtag. There are a lot of hashtags on Twitter that really have spoken to different groups of people. So we see Solidarity is for White Women, which was within the past year, and it's hang in there, we will free you. So this was really to speak about how feminism in its form that's really spread through or propagated through society, the lean in feminism maybe, so to speak. If you are familiar with Sheryl Sandberg and her book Lean In, really it is for a specific group of women. And it might be trying to perpetuate ideals that other groups or other women in our society don't necessarily want to participate in, right? Exciting initiatives, so exciting things like Solidarity is for White Women. People are having conversations about this. And so it's really exciting to see. Black Power is for Black men. This was really revealing for me to really identify some of the issues that are coming up in the Black community and between Black men and Black women. So Black Power is for Black men. When men demand submission as proof that a woman loves them. I don't think this is specific to the Black community, but I think it does bring up an issue of we have these larger issues of society, and we say, okay, you need to kind of put your ideals and your needs as a Black woman on hold for this larger cause of Blackness, and which tends to go toward what Black men want and need, right? Not your Asian sidekick. This is what I get when I Google Asians. So yes, we need to have a not your Asian sidekick combo because we matter. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but there are a lot of really absurd pictures. When you look on Google and you just Google Asians, you see some really unfortunate pictures that really aren't representative of, or may not be representative of who they are as a people, right? And then not your adjunct sidekick. So this isn't just about race or ethnicity, it can be about a lot of different things. We don't always, or we may not think of adjunct professors as a group that really is working to, or maybe underprivileged. But we may be adjunct teachers, but we make up the majority of the faculty nationwide, and 75% of us are on subsistence wages. So there are a lot of issues that come from, that are coming in academia of really universities and colleges trying to shift the load of teaching to adjunct professors, or really not giving them benefits or not really giving them what they need to live well, right? Hopefully this can lead to richer conversations, relationships, and lives. I really hope that we can really connect better as people as a result of seeking out these difficult conversations. And then I just want to say thank you. You can access this presentation at this site, so tinyurl.com/OliverOasis. And then so for further reading, I included a bunch of links that you all might want to look at. So with that, I will take questions.